I met Darnell at a church potluck, which was perfect because I'd been working on cultivating this whole wholesome image. Marcus had been bugging me for months to come to one of their events, and I finally gave in because honestly, church guys tend to be the reliable type. The kind who have steady jobs and want to settle down properly. Darnell was exactly what I expected. Polite, respectful, the type who'd probably ask permission before holding my hand. He had this earnest way of talking about his faith that was actually kind of endearing, even if it was a little intense for my taste. When he asked for my number, I made sure to seem pleasantly surprised rather than eager. I'd learned that guys like Darnell respond better when they think they're pursuing you. Our first few dates were exactly what you'd expect from someone raised in the church. Dinner at family restaurants. Long walks where we talked about our values and future goals. Nothing remotely physical. I played the part perfectly, wearing modest dresses and talking about how important it was to take things slow, when he didn't even try to kiss me until our fourth date. I knew I had him figured out completely. The whole courtship thing was honestly pretty easy once I understood what he wanted. Darnell was looking for a good Christian wife, someone who would be a partner in building the kind of life he'd probably been dreaming about since he was 12. I could be that for him. I went to church every Sunday, participated in the women's Bible study, and made sure everyone saw how devoted I was to growing in my faith. His friends loved me, especially Marcus, who kept telling Darnell how lucky he was to find someone so genuine. After about 9 months of this perfectly choreographed relationship, Darnell proposed. It wasn't exactly a surprise. We'd been talking about marriage for weeks, and I made sure to mention the kind of ring I preferred and how much I loved intimate ceremonies. He did it right after church one Sunday, in front of everyone, which was exactly the kind of public declaration that sealed the deal. I said yes with just the right amount of tears and excitement, and everyone applauded like we were the perfect Christian couple they'd all been rooting for. We planned the wedding for 3 months later. Nothing too elaborate because Darnell wasn't flashy with money, but it was nice enough. Small ceremony, mostly family and church friends. Everything very traditional and proper. I looked beautiful in my dress, not too revealing, but fitted enough to remind everyone that Darnell was getting a good deal. Walking down the aisle, I felt genuinely satisfied. I was 26, getting married to a stable man who adored me, and everyone thought I was the sweetest thing. Mission accomplished. The first year and a half of marriage was exactly what I'd expected. Darnell worked his steady job, came home every evening, and we settled into this comfortable routine. He'd fix things around the house and talk about maybe starting his own business someday, while I managed our social calendar and kept up appearances at church. It was fine, really safe and predictable, which is what I thought I wanted. But somewhere around the 18-month mark, I started feeling restless. Maybe it was starting my job at the insurance company that changed things. Suddenly I was around different types of people every day, more sophisticated than the church crowd, with bigger ambitions and more interesting lives. My supervisor, David, was particularly impressive. He'd worked his way up to regional management, had this commanding presence in meetings, and actually treated me like I had a brain instead of just nodding along to everything I said like Darnell did. David noticed things about me that my own husband didn't seem to see. When I started updating my work wardrobe, buying clothes that were more fashionable and professional, David complimented my style. When I joined the gym and started taking better care of myself, he mentioned how dedicated I seemed to self-improvement. It felt good to be seen as someone with potential, instead of just Darnell's sweet little wife. I started staying later at work, partly because David often worked late, and the conversations we'd have were actually stimulating. We'd talk about industry trends, office politics, career advancement, things that mattered in the real world. At home, Darnell would ask about my day, and I'd give him the basic summary, but he never really understood the complexities of what I was dealing with. How could he? He'd never worked in a competitive corporate environment. The changes I was making felt like personal growth, but Darnell started getting weird about them. When I bought a dress that was more fitted than my usual style, he made some comment about it being different from what I normally wore. When I started going to the gym after work instead of rushing home to make dinner, he'd ask if everything was okay with this concerned look on his face. It was suffocating, like he wanted to keep me locked in this little box labeled perfect church wife forever. Things with David started shifting around that time too. We'd begun having lunch together occasionally, and he'd started making comments about how refreshing it was to work with someone who understood ambition. He mentioned that his wife had gotten comfortable after they got married, stopped caring about her appearance or challenging herself professionally. I could relate to feeling underappreciated at home, and our conversations became more personal. One evening when I got home from work, Darnell was waiting in the living room with this strange expression on his face. Before I could even set my purse down, he was standing close to me, actually sniffing near my neck and shoulder. "You smell like cologne," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. I stepped back, genuinely annoyed by the accusation in his tone. Are you serious right now? I work in an office with men, Darnell. Maybe someone was wearing cologne in the elevator. Or during a meeting, I can't control what other people smell like. He kept staring at me with this suspicious look, like I was some kind of criminal. You're being insecure. I told him, which was the truth. This jealous husband routine was exactly the kind of controlling behavior I couldn't stand. But David and I had been getting closer, and maybe Darnell was picking up on something. We'd started texting outside of work hours. Nothing inappropriate. Just friendly conversations about work, stuff that sometimes drifted into more personal territory. When David suggested we grab dinner after work to discuss some projects I might be able to help him with, it seemed like a natural progression. He was talking about possibly getting me moved to a position that worked more closely with regional administration, which would be a huge step up for my career. The dinner was at a nice restaurant, much nicer than anywhere Darnell ever took me. And David was full of ideas about how we could work together more effectively. He was married too, but he understood what it was like to be ambitious, to want more than just a comfortable suburban existence. When he suggested we continue our conversation somewhere more private, it made perfect sense. He got us a room at a nice hotel nearby where we could spread out some documents and really focus on the business opportunities he was describing. I told Darnell I had a company dinner that would run late, which wasn't technically a lie. David and I were discussing company business, and it did run late. We talked for hours about the Nashville trip he was planning and how I could be involved in the regional projects if I got the promotion he was suggesting. It felt incredible to be taken seriously as a professional, to have someone believe in my potential the way David did. The next morning, Darnell was acting strange from the moment I woke up. He barely spoke during breakfast, and when I asked if something was wrong, he just gave me this look like he was studying me. I went about my normal routine, but I could feel him watching me in this unsettling way. When I got home from work that evening, he was waiting for me again, but this time he had his phone in his hand. I know where you were last night, Tamara, he said, and his voice was completely flat. He held up his phone and showed me some kind of tracking app. You weren't at any company dinner. You were at the Marriott downtown for 3 hours? I stared at the phone, genuinely shocked that he'd been tracking me like some kind of stalker. You're tracking me now. Are you kidding me right now? The violation of privacy was unbelievable. What the hell is wrong with you that you can't trust your own wife? So you're not going to deny it? He asked, still in that flat, emotionless voice that was honestly more unsettling than if he'd been yelling. Deny what? I told you I had a work dinner. David and I needed somewhere quiet to discuss some sensitive projects, so we got a room where we could talk privately. It's called business, Darnell. Maybe you'd understand if you'd ever worked anywhere that required actual professional relationships. He just kept staring at me with those cold eyes. David. Your boss, David? The married one with 2 kids? Yes, my supervisor, David, who's helping advance my career, while my own husband is apparently more interested in spying on me than supporting me. I was getting genuinely angry now. This paranoid behavior was exactly why I'd needed some space in the first place. I needed space, Darnell. You've been distant and suspicious, and I can't even have a work meeting without you losing your mind. A work meeting in a hotel room until midnight. It just happened one time, I said, which was true. We'd only gotten the room once, even though we'd been having dinners and long conversations for weeks, and nothing inappropriate happened. We were working, but Darnell wasn't buying any of it. And over the next 2 days, he became like a completely different person. Cold, methodical, asking me direct questions and writing down my answers like he was building some kind of case. When I tried to explain that David and I had a professional relationship that Darnell was misinterpreting, he'd just nod and write more notes. I tried everything I could think of to get through to him. I pulled out my Bible and sat in the living room reading it, making sure he could see how much I was praying about our situation. I suggested we see the pastor for counseling, that we pray together about working through this rough patch in our marriage. I even cried, real tears, because I was genuinely upset that my husband thought so little of me. Nothing worked. Darnell just watched my performance with those same cold eyes and told me he'd already contacted a lawyer. A lawyer? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Over a work dinner. You're going to destroy our marriage because you're too insecure to trust me. I'm filing for divorce. Tamara? On grounds of adultery? The word hit me like a slap. Adultery. Are you insane? I haven't committed adultery. I had a business meeting with my supervisor, but apparently Darnell had been busy during those 2 days, because when we got to court on April 19th, he had a lot more than just tracking data. His lawyer, Mr. Rodriguez, played audio recordings that I didn't even know existed. David's voice filled the courtroom. If I get her to regional admin, we can do that Nashville trip and no one will bat an eye. Hearing David's voice like that, talking about me like I was part of some scheme, was humiliating. But worse was listening to myself on those recordings, saying things that sounded much worse out of context than they had in the moment. The judge granted Darnell everything he asked for, divorce on grounds of adultery, no alimony, and apparently Mr. Rodriguez had sent copies of all the evidence to my company's HR department and board of directors. Within a week, both David and I were terminated. The official reason was violation of company policy regarding relationships between supervisors and subordinates. But everyone knew the real story. David barely spoke to me during those final days, and when I tried to call him after we were both fired, he wouldn't return my calls. Apparently his wife had left him too, but instead of us supporting each other through the mess, he just disappeared, moved to some firm in another city and never looked back. I had to move back in with my parents, which was mortifying at 28 years old. The insurance industry is smaller than people think, and word got around fast. I couldn't get hired anywhere decent, so I ended up working temp jobs, mostly receptionist work, that paid barely enough to cover my car payment. I gained weight, stopped going to church because I couldn't stand the looks and whispered conversations, and eventually deleted all my social media because I was tired of seeing how well everyone else was doing. David had completely vanished from my life. Darnell wouldn't take my calls, and I was stuck living in my childhood bedroom while my parents tried to be supportive but clearly didn't understand how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The worst part was hearing through mutual friends that Darnell was doing great. He'd started some kind of woodworking business that was actually successful, was going to the gym regularly, and seemed perfectly fine without me. About 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I finally worked up the courage to try reaching out to him. I left a voicemail that I spent hours rehearsing. I know I don't deserve anything from you, and I'm not asking for anything except maybe the chance to apologize properly. You were the love of my life and I ruined everything. And I just want you to know how sorry I am. When he didn't call back, I sent an email explaining how David had used me, how I'd been naive and made terrible decisions, but that losing Darnell had made me realize what really mattered. I told him I'd been going to therapy, trying to understand why I'd sabotaged the best thing in my life. Still nothing. So I called our mutual friend Michelle, hoping she could give me some insight into whether Darnell might ever be open to at least talking. Michelle was polite but distant, and when I tried to explain how much I missed the security and stability I'd had with Darnell, she just said she'd pass along that I'd called. 3 weeks later, I sent one final message. I'll always be sorry for what I did to us. I hope you're happy. And then I forced myself to stop, because it was clear that Darnell had moved on completely, and my attempts to reconnect were just making me look desperate. It's been over 2 years now since the divorce, and I still think about how different things could have been if I'd made better choices. Darnell was a good man who loved me, and I threw it away for what turned out to be nothing. David used me and discarded me the moment things got complicated, and I lost everything. My marriage, my career, my reputation, my friends. I know people think I got what I deserved, and maybe they're right. But it's hard not to feel like the punishment didn't fit the crime. I made some mistakes. Got caught up in attention from someone who seemed to offer more excitement than my quiet life with Darnell, and ended up losing everything that actually mattered. Now Darnell has his successful business and his peaceful life, while I'm still trying to rebuild from nothing. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about the good times we had, or if he's completely erased me from his memory. I hope he's genuinely happy, even though it hurts to know that his happiness has nothing to do with me anymore. I learned too late that safe and predictable aren't boring. They're precious, and some mistakes cost you everything. No matter how sorry you are afterward,